Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chuchu as a Ranker. On this episode, we are going to be discussing the discography of the British, Indian, Swedish rock band Echobelly, the core of which is the songwriting team of guitarist Glenn Johansson and vocalist Sonja Madden. Formed in 1992, Echobelly stood out in the Britpop class of 93 and 94 for having the first female voice to break through in the movement. But not only was Sonja Madden female, but she was also of ethnic descent, which in today's more enlightened society is, quite rightly, nothing to remark at. But the laddish nature of 90s Britpop did have a kind of misogynistic and somewhat jingoistic undercurrent. That's the sad truth of why the overwhelming majority of Britpop bands were male and white. But Sonja managed to cut through that noise and blaze a trail that would soon be followed by the likes of Sleeper, Elastica, Dubstar and Republica. And the band's first two albums were relatively successful, but after the critical and commercial failure of their third album Lustra, the band were dropped by their label and had to self-finance their next two releases before finally splitting up in 2004. In 2009, the core songwriting partnership of Johansson and Madden reunited for some acoustic shows, and that eventually led to a crowd-funded final album in 2017. And as for my own fandom, yeah, I like Echobelly. I had their first three albums as a teenager in the Britpop period and enjoyed those to varying degrees, but I did unfortunately lose track of the band after their third LP, so I'm looking forward to finding out what the band did in their later career. So, without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are the studio albums of Echobelly ranked from worst to best. So, coming in last, dead last, we have Gravity Pools from 2004, which was the band's fifth LP. And hey, you there! Do you like bland, sub-Coldplay adult contemporary quote-unquote mature guitar rock with very little in the way of hooks or compelling lyrics? Is vanilla processed production that sounds like it was recorded on a laptop before laptops were good at doing that kind of thing in your musical wheelhouse? Do you love beige soundscapes and the type of dull guitar playing that would put your grandmother to sleep in her rest home? If the answer is yes, then rejoice, because Echobelly have totally got your back on this. If the answer is no, then best to steer clear of this incredibly boring dog egg of an album. So this is 42 minutes of just utter tedium that can't even muster a single track worth highlighting. Better to spend that 42 minutes doing something more fun, like scrubbing the mold off the back of your washing machine. But for all the snoozing grannies out there, I am going to be exceptionally kind and give this a very charitable 2 stars. Next up, we have People Are Expensive from 2001, which was the band's fourth album. And after the failure of the band's third LP, this saw Echobelly turn in the least interesting direction possible. Here they're putting aside the hooks, the catchiness and the twisting guitar riffs, and instead putting the focus on more atmospheric soundscapes, with Johansson delivering a spacious set of guitar chord canvases for Sonja Madden's lyrics to play out on. Except, as much as Sonja sometimes sings like Morrissey, she's not Morrissey. She's not Neil Hannon, or Bob Dylan, or Joni Mitchell, or Patti Smith. When stripped of the entertaining and catchy rock compositions that usually bustle around her, Sonja Madden's lyrics just don't really hold up very well. She's just not quite lyrically astute enough to sustain this type of music at this point in her life. And Johansson doesn't get off scot-free either. His compositions for the most part are quite dull, and the tame wash of effects he uses to try and create more texture feel very vapid and transparent. I mean, someone should have played him 13 by Blur. Now that's how you do effects washes, son. But still, this is a bit better than Gravity Pools through the virtue of having better production and a sprinkling of mild highlights. Tell Me Why has a small vestige of catchiness left over from the good old days. Down to Earth has a nice melancholic lilt, as does the late album track Ondine, while the instrumental title track People Are Expensive does the whole atmospheric texturing thing quite well. But yeah, at 54 minutes in length, this is just too long and too dull to recommend. I mean, I don't want to ever hear these bottom two Echobelly albums ever again. 2.5 stars for this. Better get back to scrubbing that washing machine. And by that, I mean me, not Sonia Madden. I'm not a sexist misogynist. I'm not! I swear! Next up, we have the band's third album, Lustra, from 1997. And this album saw Echobelly in an unstable form, suffering through lineup changes, clashes with the record label during a company merger, and Sonia Madden's debilitating thyroid illness. Adding to the woes was the fact that the Britpop ship had sprung a leak and was in the process of going down. And sadly, Lustra became one of the first notable failures that clearly indicated towards the plummet that was about to befall the entire movement. And the general disarray around the band was reflected by Lustra, which is an album that's just all over the place. It's burdened by a lack of direction, some seriously overcooked production, and some straight up weak material. Yet it also contains some great high spots too. So the good stuff first. Lead single The World Is Flat has some fun hammering pace to it and a catchy chorus. I'm Not a Saint has a nice distorted bounce to it. Closer and title track Lustra has a really cool stuttering guitar attack, while album highlight Here Comes the Big Rush impresses with its spoken word verses and soaring choruses. But then things go off the rails pretty badly. Oh is a microcosm for the overcooked faults of the record. I mean, it could have worked if it just had a bit more delicacy, but it's just overworked into oblivion here. Bleed has an annoyingly piercing vocal from Madden that clearly needs remixing. I mean, quite why they didn't fix that is beyond me. Iris Art feels like rote Britpop filler, while Paradise ruins the lovely melody of its verses with an overcooked, clattering chorus that does nothing for the track. So yeah, I mean, there are moments of brightness on this that save it from the scrap pile, but it's still an overall failure and a definite step down in quality from the band's previous two records. 3 stars. Coming in next, we have On from 1995, which was the band's second album. And this is a pretty typical style of second LP, one hewn from touring and tightening up as a band, but one that also has little in the way of innovation or ambition, beyond putting together a clutch of catchy tunes that would play well to a live audience. And that tightening up I mentioned is both a blessing and a curse. I mean, on the negative side, it does hammer out the looseness that some of the more artistic compositions like Bellyache or Scream had on the debut. But on the positive side, it does see the best tracks off this hit god tier levels of guitar pop catchiness. The first 3 tracks on the record are just staggeringly brilliant, some of the greatest Britpop songs ever put to tape. Opener Car Fiction is 2.5 minutes of distorted jangle bliss. King of the Curb has a great heaving rockist element to it, with some amazing screaming guitar licks and interesting lyrics seemingly about male sex workers. Great Things, meanwhile, is so unbelievably catchy and anthemic, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single person that would dislike it. But the highlights extend beyond just the opening. Go Away has a sing-along chorus guaranteed to make everybody start pogoing. Nobody Like You has an alluring Morrissey-esque vibe to it, whilst album highlight Dark Therapy is arguably Echobelly's finest moment, as it weaves a swampily atmospheric haze around Sonia Madden's brilliant existential lyrics. The track just totally lifts up and sends you hurtling off into the cosmos with a cathartic rush of awesomeness. It is phenomenal. On the negative side, well, there's not really a whole lot to dig into, but some tracks like Pantyhose and Roses, Something Hot in a Cold Country, and In the Year are individually pretty good, but they do share a bit too many similarities with each other. Well, as I already mentioned, the record does lack a certain amount of innovation and ambition. But these are just nitpicks, really. This is a great album that's also incredibly nostalgic for me, and we're really turning the corner in terms of quality here. This gets 4 stars. Next up, we have Anarchy and Alchemy from 2017, which was the band's 6th and final LP. And this record isn't a million miles away from the band's weakest albums, Gravity Pulls and People Are Expensive, being a more atmospheric-based, emotional and mature offering. But crucially, it's actually done well this time around. The beauty of this record is its simplicity. This sounds more like the work of a duo rather than a full band. The focus is completely on Sonja Madden's vocals and Glenn Johansson's guitars. And everything is kept clean and straightforward, with little in the way of overdubs, especially when it comes to the guitar work. I mean, there is some low mixed bass, percussion and occasional and very subtle use of keyboards, but that's it on this album. It's just a really stripped back kind of affair. And it works incredibly well as both Madden and Johansson bring their best to the table. Madden's voice has aged really well and so has her lyrical maturity. She no longer sounds like a wide-eyed pop pixie like the earlier records, or drowning out of her lyrical depth like some of the later ones. Finally, she's hit the stage in her life where she sounds like a mature, confident woman, and her lyrics and voice ring with emotional gravitas. Johansson, meanwhile, has put aside the blandly vanilla guitar work of Gravity Pulls and has rediscovered his passion, with his stuttering guitar licks and dovetailing arpeggiation easily catching the attention. I mean, there's just some really beautiful clean guitar lines on this record. And this album is consistent from start to finish with no weak material in sight. But because of its style, it's not really a record with a ton of standout bright spots. This is excellence through atmosphere and consistency. Although I will say that Hey 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 has some catchy vocal yelps, Firefly has an awesome glowering guitar snarl to it, while Flesh and Bone is one of the most emotionally salient and gorgeous ballads the band ever put to tape. So yeah, I mean, this is a pretty huge return to form after 3 relatively lackluster efforts. It's pretty much perfect for what it is. 4.5 stars for this. So here we are at the top of the mountain, and the Echobelly gold medal is going to go to the band's debut album, Everyone's Got One, from 1994. And yeah, start to finish, top to bottom, this is a classic Britpop record with no weak tracks and is also home to several potent bangers. And the soundscape of this record is very typical of Britpop. It consists of distorted, bouncing jangle tunes, upbeat energy and soaring sing-along choruses, with Sonja Madden adding the X element with a wide-eyed, innocent kind of appeal. And highlights on an incredibly consistent LP include, well, yeah, pretty much everything. Opener Today, Tomorrow, Sometime, Never kicks things off with a frantic clatter, with Madden breaking into punky shouts at its climax. Father, Ruler, King Computer and Bellyache add some art-rocky darkness into the mix. Call Me Names has an almost childlike twee melody that frames Sonja's detailing of some of the racial abuse that she's had to endure. Insomniac has a great twisting guitar riff and an air-punching chorus, while Close But has a great Smiths-esque stuttering jangle composition that sounds incredibly upbeat, but closer inspection reveals it to actually be about substance abuse. Closing track Scream has a great build-up and an epic wah-wah soaked fuzzing climax. Give Her a Gun despairs of the state of the world even as its catchy chorus recalls Suede's The Drowners. While the band's signature tune, I Can't Imagine the World Without Me, is a euphoric blast of guitar pop with some great triumphant trumpet work and lyrics that kind of typify the entire Britpop genre. So yeah, this is just peak Britpop material. 5 stars for this. It's just an absolutely fantastic pop record. So now my deep dive is finished, the question remains, did I gain more appreciation for the band? Well, that's kind of tricky this time round. I mean, those first 2 Echobelly records are great, but then again, I always knew they were great. And Lustra, People Are Expensive and Gravity's Pull didn't really do anything for me. However, Anarchy and Alchemy was definitely a delightful surprise. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it's tricky. But ultimately, I think my perception hasn't really changed for the better or for the worse. I'm pretty much exactly at the place where I was when I came into this. So, you know, take from that what you will. And that's my list, but of course that won't be your list, so please sound off in the comment section and tell me how you'd rank these records. Like, share, subscribe and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Take care of yourself, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.